Good morning, everyone. My name is Kyle Dragon. I'm a business management student here at the Greenfield Community College. The following is going to be my video presentation for the Principles of Management, BUS 205, taught by Professor Simmons over summer 2017. I was selecting a book for this project. I did a little research online trying to find a nice business book. Ideally, originally was going to plan on trying to go not off the book list that Professor Simmons had provided and actually find one that was a little bit different to do a unique report. However, as I was digging through them and looking for one to send for confirmation I could use this book, I kept thinking about it and decided that I would actually go off the book list of pre-approved books in case I actually started reading a book and really couldn't get into it, really couldn't figure out what it was about. This would allow me to swap books without having to go through the entire process of getting a book approved again. Based on this, I selected the book Getting to Yes Negotiating Without Agreement. It was published in 2011 by Penguin Books and is currently in its third edition. The second edition was released in 1991 and the first edition was released 30 years ago in 1981. It is authored by Roger Fisher and William Ury. Those two authors have maintained all the editions, starting with the first one in 1981, and is edited by Bruce Patton. Author Roger Fisher is a former professor at the Harvard Law School. He is the former director and founder of the Harvard Negotiation Project and was also a founding chair of the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School. He practiced law in Washington and has consulted for the Department of Defense along with numerous government organizations and individuals. Author William Ury is the co-founder of the Harvard Program of Negotiation and is a distinguished fellow of the Harvard Negotiation Project. He is a graduate of Yale and Harvard and has a doctorate in social anthropology. He has served as a mediator and advisor in negotiations. He has ranged from wildcat strikes with unions all the way up to ethnic wars around the world. He has served as a consultant to the White House during the establishment of the nuclear risk reduction centers in Washington and in Moscow. Bruce Patton, the editor of the book Getting to Yes, Negotiating Agreement Without Giving In, is a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School. He is a co-founder of the Harvard Negotiation Project and co-founder of the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School. He is the founder and partner of Vantage Partners LLC, a consulting firm that helps Global 2000 companies negotiate and manage the most critical relationships. When you think about negotiation, what do you think? Do you think reaching a mutual agreement? Do you think that you're going to negotiate exactly what you want and that the other side's eventually going to give in? The latter is actually positional bargaining. It's not even negotiating, which is something they stress very clearly, the authors in the beginning of this book. One such example that they put in the book that I thought was really quite interesting was it referenced two men in a library. One of them was hot and wanted to open the window. It was a nice fall day. The other didn't want the window open because he didn't want the draft. They were going back and forth. One of them was demanding it be open, the other one was demanding it not. The librarian ended up coming in, probably because they were being so loud about it. And she thought about it for a second, and she opened a window in another room. Now, both parties, the compromise was meant for both parties. The window where they were was not opened. A window was open, so the building cooled down, but the original party who didn't want to draft didn't have the draft in the window because it was open in a different room. The book itself is broken into 6 chapters. Chapter 1 is going to cover the problem. In this chapter, you learn that you don't bargain over positions. This would go back to the library story. Man 1 wants the window open, man 2 wants the window closed. The opening or closing of the window is the position that they're stuck with. So when you get into chapter 2, you now launch into the method. The method for chapter 2 is separate the people from the problem. So you take the human element out of the problem. Chapter 3, you focus on the interests of each person, but not the position that they're arguing. So why do you want the window open? Why do you want the window closed? Chapter 4 covers inventing options. What are some options that we can create here that would solve this problem? And then chapter 5 covers using objective criteria. What is the criteria that we can use to resolve these problems? As you read chapter 1, which talks about separating people from the problem, the big thing they stress is that negotiators are people first, and that it is a fact that is commonly overlooked and forgotten in corporation and international negotiations and business dealings. You're not dealing with a computer. You are not dealing with someone who doesn't care. You are dealing with people. People have emotions, they have values, they have different viewpoints and backgrounds. But the biggest thing is, on both sides, is we are unpredictable. You can't predict what we're going to do. We jump to conclusions. I say one thing in one tone of voice, you think I'm saying something else. We can get angry, we get depressed, we get fearful. We have egos. We all have egos, no matter how big or small. We have an ego. That ego gets stepped on. We get mad. But the human element can also be helpful. We seek to create relationships. We seek for that trust with each other. We're concerned over our perceived images. And these tend to sometimes make us more sensitive to what we're trying to get through, because we can relate to it. It all depends on how you pose the problem. Principle number 1, focus on the interests. Your position is something you have decided upon. Going back to the men in the library, they decided that he wanted that window closed. The other one decided, I want that window open. Those are their positions. Their interests are what caused them to reach that decision. So, man 1 wanted the window closed because he did not want a draft. Because of the draft, he reached the position, I want the window closed. Man 2 wanted the window open because it was hot in the room. He reached the conclusion he wanted the window open to help cool down the room because it was a nice fall day. When discussing your interests, you need to make it come alive. If you go to a doctor for something, he asks you, how bad is the pain? You tell him, it's a 3, it's a 2, on a scale of 1 to 10, when really it's an 8 or 9, but you're trying to be brave and you don't want to admit that you're really hurt. He's going to treat you for a 2 or 3. He doesn't know it's an 8 or 10. He can't read your mind. So be specific. Concrete details can make your descriptions credible, and they add impact to what you are saying. Sure that when you're doing this, you have to acknowledge their interests. The men in the library, they didn't do that. They didn't look at each other's interests. Man 1 wanted the window closed, man 2 wanted the window open. They just saw what they wanted, and that's what they based on. You have to acknowledge the other person's interests. We are too concerned with our own interests that we pay little attention to the interests of others. It's just a fact of human life. Everything's about us. The problem before the answer. If you launch right into, well, you should do this, and this, but don't actually say why, you're automatically going to put them on the defensive, whoever you're speaking with. But if you open with, hey, this is the issue I'm having. I believe the story they used in the book was a construction company. The construction company had trucks that were racing up and down the street all hours of the day, almost hitting some little kids. They went right in. This father went right in there, and scenario one, he went right up to the construction company and says, "I demand that you build a fence and you enforce 15 mile per hour speed limits." And the company just shut down. The the person in charge wasn't listening to him because he just went right off. He launched right into his term of the answer instead of bringing the problem first. In scenario two, the father went in there. He said, "Hey, here's the issue. Little Susie was nearly hit by a dump truck the other morning. Your driver, the big red truck, had to swerve to avoid her because he was going too fast. Susie's 5 years old. How can we fix this before something bad happens?" At this point, you're telling him about their dump truck. You're telling him about little Susie and how she's 5 years old and almost got hit. And they're listening because they don't know where you are going with this. Like, are you suing them? What are you doing? So they're going to be listening. That's when you can bring up an answer. You've laid out the problem. Here's the problem. Your trucks go too fast. There's little kids that live here. Now you can bring up and say, "Hey, how can we fix this? Can we put a fence up? Can we maybe enforce some speed limits?" But now they've listened to the problem, so now they can understand where you're going with the answer. The thing you have to remember is be hard on the problem, but soft on the people. You need to be hard. You have to commit yourself to your position, not to your position, but rather to your interest. The father, he wanted a fence built. He wanted that done. But he knew that if he went right in there and said, "I demand that you build a fence and enforce speed limits," they were going to go tell him to go take a flying leap. They weren't going to do it. So instead, he went hard on his interests. "Hey, little Susie nearly got hit. How can we fix this?" So instead of lobbying for his position, which was, "I demand you build a fence," he lobbied his interests instead to come to a solution with the company. So they're people. They may not see the same problem that you see. So chapter 4, method 3, is generation of options. This is where they cover taking the time to speak with the other person, brainstorm, come up with options. Obviously, lobbying for your positions directly is not going to get you anywhere. So this is where they discuss taking the time, sitting down with someone, and coming up with ideas that could possibly lead to a solution. Cover the 4 types of thinking that you should utilize while trying to come up with options. You should state the problem. Obviously, the problem in the library was the fact one person wanted the window open, the other one didn't. The problem in the construction yard was that the trucks were going too fast and that there was no fence. Analyze the problem. And then consider general approaches. How can you approach this problem? How can we fix this problem? And consider specific actions. What can we do? What can we do to help solve this problem? And make it a mutually beneficial solution. Chapter 5 is the 4th part of the method for negotiation, is objective criteria. Objective criteria is used when the interests of both parties are directly opposed. There's no closeness or an area that can be smoothed out so that both parties can meet equally. Allowing it to go unchecked is inefficient and will most likely not produce wise agreements. This covers how to work with this. A scenario used in the book is a construction company. It's a homeowner and a foreman or a contractor or whatever you want to refer to them as having a discussion. And the contractor is saying, I went along with you with this. I want you to go along with me with pouring shallow foundations instead of doing the full length foundation. The homeowner, obviously, he's not going to say yes to that because shallow foundations aren't going to be suitable. If you only pour a 2-foot foundation, you're not going to have enough to actually safely secure your house if it's a large house. So instead of arguing with him and trying to horse trade or break him down, he says, I'm not saying you're right, I'm not saying you're wrong, but what do building standards say? What is the earthquake chance here? Is it going to safely hold the building? He's not arguing with the guy saying, no, we're going to do this. But he's pulling in objective and to the point matters to try and come to a resolution, saying, hey, can we pour 2-foot foundations? Are we going to have an earthquake and is the entire place going to fall in? Is it going to blow over in a strong gust of wind? Basically, he used reasonable standards to help allow both parties to reach an agreement and preserve a good relationship. So by saying, I'm not telling you no personally, but in our case, Mass General Law says, and the National Fire Prevention Act says, you need to meet this code spec. And if 2-foot foundations aren't on there, we can't pour 2-foot foundations. Chapter 6 is a little bit unique. Chapter 6 covers 3 of the most commonly asked questions. What if they are more powerful? What if they won't play? And what if they use dirty tricks? In conclusion, I'm not going to get into Chapter 6, only because of the time. I don't want to spend your entire day here listening to me drone on about negotiations. I hope that if you do find yourself time and looking for something to read, that you do take the time to pick up this book and read it. It does have quite some interesting views and information. The authors are actually very knowledgeable in the subject, and it portrays. It's not all textbook style. There's lots of scenario-based examples, so you can actually see what it is they are talking about, which I greatly appreciate, because they may phrase something and I didn't quite understand it, and you flip the page and then there's an entire scenario laid out using what they were just talking about, and that allowed me to make a stronger connection and bond with the book, being able to relate to it, being able to see what they were saying and be able to say, hey, I get that.